All right, we're here today to talk about amending the definition of community network. So this kind of has a long history. We have had a community network policy in the manual for a number of years. It's not been used a lot, and so there's been attempts to clean it up, to remove it. People didn't like removing it, so here we are looking at amending it now. One other item that came up in our discussion is, what is a community network? The Internet Society has a definition that maybe helps illuminate what a community network is for some people. We may not agree with this definition, but hopefully it helps us think about how community networks can help other people in the world. So here's the current text. I'm not going to read through this, but it's here for our reference, should we need it. But I am going to focus a little bit on the new text. So I've took the liberty of using large fonts and colors here to help us. So the red text is about what the kind of an organization that we're talking about. The purple text highlights an issue that was raised on the list about other information technology. Maybe that's too loose of a definition. And finally, the green text highlights a part that was also raised about critical functions and paid staff. One of the main issues of the current text is the current policy is that it requires 100% volunteer, and it was deemed that that's too rigid a restriction for most organizations. So some things that have happened on the list. Generally speaking, this has not been used very frequently. We like policy to be used as necessary. We're not opposed to having something that's not used very often, but if it should be used more frequently, we definitely want to make sure it fits. As I said earlier, the volunteer-only part has been a stumbling block, we believe. And there's some concern that the current policy has gone from overly strict to the new policy being overly broad. So are we finding the right balance here amongst the new definition? There's been raised a question about what is a volunteer group? Is that an organization? ARIN has an RSA. Can volunteer groups sign an RSA? How does that work? Secondly, the question about volunteers play a large role. That has been raised as a possible issue of very wide and open to interpretation. Should we change that text to make it a little bit more clear? Some folks noticed that critical functions may be handled by paid staff. Seems to apply volunteers shouldn't handle critical functions. That certainly I don't think was the intent. We think that community networks definitely have volunteers that should be able to do all of the critical functions as part of an organization, as the original one assumed 100% volunteers. We don't want to exclude that. And then there was also comments about nonprofit, not-for-profit, charitable status, whether that's relevant at all in this discussion, or whether community networks should just be defined by what they do, not how they are organized. Finally, there's another section that talks about community networks in the policy manual in section 6 around IPv6, which has some different text than this definition that's found in section 2. There's been some discussion about should we be also opening up that section to editing and making all of these be harmonious. The current text is only discussing the definition in section 2. But perhaps we should also be looking deeper into there. And finally, there was originally the community networks policy was created in the idea that it possibly would give fee relief and that the board needed some sort of definition so it could define fee relief to a policy area. The board has not chosen to do that, so there's no fees for community networks. However, the board has created smaller categories, specifically the 3x small category, that may be much more applicable to a community network, and should we now change the definition of community network to be more in line with the 3x small category? So some questions for our discussion amongst all the slides we've already talked about. Is the financial structure of an organization important? How do we want to define a community network? Are there elements here that we should keep? Should we throw away? What parts need more work? Should we open up section 6 and also work on that as well? So those are my questions to the audience here for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you keep that one. All right. Same drill as before. Approach a microphone. However, if you approach a microphone, you're already a bit behind because I've been told we have several remote participation requests clearing up. Although, Chris, could you try and maybe reposition your mic, because it was hard when you were looking at the screen, and so maybe you could reposition that. So we'll go to the remote participation queue in just a second, but we will first go to that microphone over there.
Hi, David Huberman, Oracle, ARIN AC. John Postel started a lot of what we do here as the original numbers administrator. And one of the things that John was characterized by was he was very easygoing. Let people do what they want to do. In the ARIN community, when we make policy, we sometimes go the other way. And sometimes in an attempt to manage resources well and to be good proprietors of the numbers that we look over, sometimes we go the other way. We've had this community networks policy for a very long time, and it hasn't been very well used, and we've gotten some input as to why that is. I think as we've gone through this process on this policy proposal, on the list, and in our meetings here, I think we're getting a lot closer to it. I really like this more liberal definition that we're moving towards. I'm especially in favor of the most recent draft that was posited on the list just yesterday by Richard Letts, which opens up the language even more. My input is simply to say I'm fairly strongly in support of the work that we're doing here, and we need to let community networks do what community networks want to do so that they can provide internet connectivity to those whom they serve.
Thank you for that statement in support. All right, Chris, I believe we have almost 7, if not more, remote participation, so could we maybe knock 2 out of for now?
So Marla Azinger says, I don't see a problem with the current text, nor that no one has used it recently. I'm concerned we're opening up to scope creep for no valid reason. Are there entities that have tried to use this policy and were denied because they don't qualify? If yes, how many?
Does anyone from staff able to answer that quickly, or at least maybe queue it up for an answer?
We know we've approved one. In terms of, I don't know if we haven't had other requests or if we've turned them down, but I will get that stat and report it back promptly.
We have approved one? I thought have not approved one.
We've approved one.
Is this recent?
I know we've approved one. I don't know whether or not that's because we've turned down all the others or received none of the others, but I will find out and let you know shortly.
Okay, so Marla will get you some more data on that. Thank you for the comment. Next one, Chris Tassett. Just trying to clear that queue out.
That's it for now.
Oh, okay. I heard we had many. Sorry. Center microphone then.
Hi, Donnie Roisman with IBM SoftLayer. I am in support of the work we're doing on this policy as well. I just wanted to offer a suggestion. The last sentence in the new text is pretty self-contradictory. It says that functions are handled by staff, but could be handled by volunteers. My input is, since we've argued a little bit about it, just drop the whole darn sentence. I don't understand really the point of even mentioning it. Or just simply say critical functions may be handled by staff or volunteers, and leave it at that.
So you're supportive of the policy direction, but just drop that sentence.
Just drop it so it's not, I think it's a little too complicated and I think it's unnecessary.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. Our microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. So I authored the first 2 community network proposals. I'm not going to talk about the text. I'm not in support of this policy as it's written or as it's arranged. My issue is very simple. What is the problem in our policy today that is preventing community networks from getting space? If there's a problem getting space, does that benefit apply to everyone, or should it apply to a limited definition, i.e. community networks? If there is no problem getting space because of all of the changes that have occurred in the last 8 years since this policy came out, then we don't need to have community networks at all because our general policies have improved for everyone. If there is an issue where people can't get space, then the question is there a benefit for everyone in the community to take advantage and have that? Or do we need a definition? Nobody has answered the fundamental question of who is being turned away and why. And until that is answered, this policy is going to go nowhere.
So you are opposed, and you're opposed because you don't believe there's a valid problem statement, effectively.
Correct.
Thank you. Microphone over there.
Jeremy Austin, Whitestone Power and Communications, ARIN member and fellow. I ran a completely volunteer community network for about 15 years, but was not yet an ARIN member. When I became a paid employee and an ARIN member, then of course I no longer qualified, despite the fact that I was still undeniably running a community network. So I, however, differ with our friend from the wire that I do believe this definition should be changed, and so I support this policy. However, I believe that the benefits are insufficiently defined. So I do agree with him on that point. The arguments, for example, saying that if you're larger than a 3x, I'm not sure that's valid. I'm larger than a 3x, but I think I would still qualify as a community network.
So I think where the interesting question was, and maybe either you can answer now or later, is assuming this text was adopted, is there still something else that's prohibiting your network from operating in ARIN policy? Because I think that's what I heard Kevin asking, correct?
I don't believe that there is.
Okay. So you don't believe that there is? Sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Sorry. Do you believe that your organization would qualify under this text now?
I do.
Okay. Thank you.
But so the question is, so your organization would meet this text, but is there a request that you would like to make that you would not get under current policy, even with this? Like, is there a resource that you believe you have tried to request or would request in the future that you would not qualify under this text? Because I think that was what Kevin was trying to get at, is he's trying to get clarity.
No, he's getting at would he qualify without a community networks policy?
Well, let me ask Kevin, since Kevin's at a mic, what he's...
Specifically, since this policy, since the last 8 years, I believe regular policy, standard IPv6 policy, has eased so much that you would never need to use the community networks policy. So if people are being rejected because of that they're so small or so specific, that's great, I'd like to hear that, but I believe everybody in this room who is a community network can get it under regular policy and doesn't need this policy.
Right, and I'm just trying to synthesize comments. I'm not trying to, so that's what I heard was that even if this, I think Kevin was just saying if this definition's changed, it still doesn't act anything. I see John Sweeting in the aisle, so I don't know if this is a data point that he would like to do. So I'm just going to let him inject for a second.
John Sweeting with ARIN. In John's request, there have been none disapproved. There's been one request actually in the very few weeks ago that was approved. There was one denied, but that was the one that was the reason for the policy being made in the first place, so it wasn't under the current policy.
So there's been theory one denial, but pre, and then there's been one approval, which is a very recent development. Thank you. So I'll go back to you, sir, if you wanted to add anything.
We had one request before the policy. It was denied. We made the policy. The policy's been out there 7+ years. And very recently, we've had the first request that came in and was approved under it.
Okay.
So it's hard to say the policy is defective given the absence of application of it.
Right. Well, I think that's the question that be curious is if 2.11 does not exist at all in the NRPM, would that request that just came through have been denied? Would have been an interesting question.
It would have been helpful when I was making the initial request. I was unable to do so because it did not qualify as a community network.
Understood.
Now I agree. It would not necessarily help me so much then.
Okay. We appreciate the feedback. We'll let you off the hook. We'll go to the, just check any remote participation. No? Okay. Middle microphone.
Owen DeLong, Akamai, ARIN AC. It is a bit of a fallacy to look at the number of denials as a measurement of the number of people that don't fit the policy or can't apply under the policy, because the vast majority of people are actually capable of reading policy to some extent at least, and they can go, I don't qualify, I'm not going to apply. And ARIN would never see those people that are disqualified by policy because they don't ask to be denied, they simply deny themselves, realizing that the policy says you will be denied.
No, and that's a fair point, and we would obviously urge those that can hear this to give examples where they might have applied if the text was different but did not, which I believe is a good point.
I think there are a number of factors that account for the fact that this policy has been little used, not the least of which is until this year there was really no measurable place where IPv6 represented more than about a small fraction of traffic. Now we've got US mobile providers up over 60% of their traffic on V6. Eyeball traffic in the US is approaching 40% V6, and so V6 only policies are starting to actually, have some actual usefulness, and you can actually now potentially build a network that is V6 only and not have everybody just completely laugh at you. So I think that the policy may have been rather early in its adoption, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with us being ahead of the game, in my opinion. I think that the very narrow definition of community networks that we're now looking to expand is another factor, and I think that expanding the definition as proposed here will probably make additional availability to community networks.
So you're supportive of the policy and supportive of this approach to the policy?
I am supportive of both the policy as it exists and of this modification to it.
Okay, thank you. We are getting to the end of the time, so I just want to make sure that if there is any people that like to get, that you either start typing madly if you're remotely, or that you approach a microphone. Otherwise, I'll be closing the microphones very shortly. We'll go to this.
Matt Petak, I'm going to ask what probably is a dumb question, but...
There are no dumb questions, but I may not know the answer, so...
What would prevent a community network as defined in this from just applying as an ordinary end-user assignment?
I think they want a discount. Sorry.
Well, I don't see anything about fees at all in the text here at all.
Well, you go first.
So I think the intent was that they are more of an ISP type organization, and so they would then qualify for a larger block and could do reassignments or reallocation. However, there is kind of a loophole or a weird part about that is that it says we get put in the end user's status, so then they're not able to do those things that maybe an ISP or would want to do. So it is originally about fees in the old days, and that's, I think we raised that issue as well.
So the justification for this is so you can be classified as an ISP, which isn't mentioned in the policy text, and you get a break on fees, which is also not mentioned in the policy text.
So fees can't be mentioned in policy text, because that's not a purview of policy. Having said that, obviously, if there's a definition and it's in the policy, it can make it easier for the board to set a fee that would say those that qualified under a section. So that is the reason fees does not appear. The AC would know that that is out of scope.
I am then against this policy as it is written and in concept, as I think this is trying to solve something that should not be solved this way. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm now closing the mic, so if that's you entering the mic, you're not entering the mic, then back away from the microphone, sir. All right, the microphones are closed, so we'll go to the center microphone and clear out our queue. And there's a remote participation. We'll get in there somewhere, so go ahead.
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. I fully support fixing up the community networks definition to remove the 100% volunteer piece. I am concerned that the other information technology services is too vague and opens it up too much. But with that part stricken, I support the redefinition. The second piece of this is section 659, which references this definition of community networks. And this is the part that says, even though they're providing transit to downstream customers, we're going to treat them like an end user in order to get fee relief. It doesn't say in order to get fee relief, but that's the unwritten text there. I'm not sure that we even need 659 now at this point based on how fees are structured. And if this really is a fee issue, I am happy for my fees to be increased, for the very smallest ISP fees to be reduced further. Right now, they're at $250 annually. I could even see them going down to $100.
Okay. I appreciate that point.
That being said, I'm not sure that the definition is useful, but we could keep it in the event that community networks need some other sort of special benefit at some point in the future. But I don't see any benefit that a community network needs that they can't get as a regular end user or regular ISP.
Understood. And I'd ask if there are feedback or suggestions on fees that we raise that either during the members' meeting or the open microphone that will be at the end of the day. Let's go to the remote participation, please. And if those in the line could limit their comments as succinct as possible. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I'm going to have to tell you that this comment is about fees. Marla said our entity's just trying to get this policy to cover them to squeeze into some form of relief of a fee.
Okay. Thank you, Marla, for the comment. So, yes, sir.
Rudy Daniel, Caribbean. I am in support of this proposal and the approach taken, although I'm not quite sure that we have the definition right as yet. I don't have a problem with the fees that currently exist or that is proposed around the general conditions.
Okay, thank you for the support. And the last comment from the room will be center microphone.
Alyssa Moore, Cybera, ARIN AC, and policy author. I kind of threw the kitchen sink into this initial definition to spur this kind of conversation, so thank you everyone for that. That being said, at this point, I am in support of, I think it was Danny who brought it up, clearing up the language around critical functions and potentially just dropping the volunteer versus staff portion in that last sentence. Certainly we would love for volunteers to be performing critical functions. That is not something that it was intended to prevent. And is financial structure important? Perhaps not. I think that the staff is capable of interpreting applications under this policy for whether or not we've got a multi-million-dollar company looking to use this policy. Obviously, it's going to be denied. So that may be able to be removed as well.
Okay, thank you for that comment. That ends this draft policy from an input perspective. Thank Andrew Dull for the presentation. A reminder that the Shepherds on this are Andrew and David Farmer, who I was just in the back of him, I was right there. So again, during lunch, which we are going into pretty much right now, they would love to hear any feedback that you can. So thank you very much, and that ends it now. John, throw it to lunch.